Chapter 8 The Gift of Selfless Service. I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know: the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. By Albert Schweitzer. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. By Mahatma Gandhi. Wealth, like happiness, is never attained when sought after directly. It comes as a byproduct of providing a useful service. By Henry Ford. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. By Rabindranath Tagore. One does not have to be an angel in order to be saint. By Albert Schweitzer. The joy of selfless service. This gift flows naturally from the gift of gratitude and the gift of generosity. When we truly understand the interconnectedness of all life, we devote ourselves to finding joy in selfless service. It has been observed that life is like the game of tennis. In order to win, we have to be good at service. Our desire to serve must be pure. It should emanate from the sheer joy of service, without expecting any reward, self-recognition, or self-gratification. When service emanates from a self-centered motive, it ceases to be service and becomes a business transaction. Under the guise of the Darwinian struggle for survival, we frequently discern that self-interest is placed before service in the relentless race to accumulate wealth, possessions, power, and fame, all geared entirely toward personal benefit alone. This unbridled pursuit of self-gratification inevitably leads to excessive greed, competition, and materialism that reign supreme in the world today. As an antidote to rampant self-centeredness, selfless service is absolutely paramount, individually and collectively, without which there can be no real progress or harmony in society. Selfless service to others can be offered in numerous ways, ranging from financial assistance to physical help. Real self-growth depends upon transcending the ego, ennobling the spirit, and revering all life. Expressed in actions, guided by selfless service, without any thought or expectation of reward whatsoever. Always working selflessly in oneness of spirit for the common good. In fact, service is a way of being where one approaches life as an offering, rather than viewing it from the standpoint of entitlement. The lives of moral leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa bear ample testimony to the power of selfless service. Gandhi devoted all his life in serving his country and its people and found deepest fulfillment through serving. According to Gandhi, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. His life serves as a beacon of light to all humanity. Likewise, Mother Teresa was a prime example of selfless service. Her entire life revolved around helping others in need, the poorest of the poor. As a result, she experienced a great deal of affection and self-fulfillment in her life. In this chapter, we primarily focus on the path of detached action, Karma Yoga, as a framework for performing selfless service. We believe that, as a practical teaching, Karma Yoga furnishes the best set of guidelines to put service before self and to perform actions for the well-being of all beings. the principal Hindu sacred book, the Bhagavad Gita will be our key guiding text in this terrain. Regarding its efficacy, we have the testimony of Mahatma Gandhi, who tested its teachings in every sphere of his life with great success. He called the Bhagavad Gita the gospel of selfless action and referred to it as his spiritual dictionary. As a matter of fact, the Bhagavad Gita's emphasis on selfless service was the prime source of inspiration for Mahatma Gandhi's life and leadership. The Bhagavad Gita expounds a threefold path to self-realization. Number 1, the path of selfless action or karma yoga. Number 2, the path of devotion or bhakti yoga. And 3, the path of knowledge or jnana yoga. Meaning literally, Lord's Song. The Bhagavad Gita unfolds as a dialogue between Sri Krishna, the divine incarnation, and his warrior disciple Arjuna on the eve of a historic battle of cosmic proportions. The Bhagavad Gita consists of 18 chapters comprising 700 verses. Different commentators have read different meanings in interpreting the text based on their own tradition or sampradaya and philosophical leanings. Some say that it teaches karma yoga, path of selfless action. Others observe that it teaches bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. And still others state that it teaches jnana yoga, the path of self-knowledge. Some commentators believe that the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita cover 3 broad categories of themes. The first 6 chapters, called Karma Shatkam, deal with the concept of selfless actions as a path to liberation. The next 6 chapters, called Bhakti Shatkam, deal with the topic of love of the personal God as a path to liberation. And the final 6 chapters, called Jnana Shatkam, deal with the path of self-knowledge as a means to spiritual liberation. Commenting on Karma Yoga as enunciated in the Bhagavad Gita, Mysore Hiranya explains, the object of the Gita is to discover a golden mean between the 2 ideals of action and contemplation. The object of the Gita is to discover a golden mean between the 2 ideals of action and contemplation, preserving the excellence of both. Karma Yoga is such a mean. It stands not for renunciation of action, but for renunciation in action, the path of enlightened action. These words, karma and yoga, have become a regular part of the daily discourse in the West. In order to understand the true import of Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action, we need to take a short excursion into the realm of Indian philosophy, especially the system of Advaita Vedanta. This system takes the ultimate reality to be one only, without a second, and represents the end or culmination of Vedas, the sacred books of knowledge. A proper understanding of Karma Yoga also assumes a clear grasp of the operation of the law of karma, as conceived within the framework of the Indian spiritual paradigm. This section is presented as a self-contained, complete module and assumes no prior knowledge of Indian philosophy on the part of the reader. All systems of Indian philosophy take it as axiomatic that the primary cause of our bondage is due to a special type of ignorance, called avidya. This ignorance does not denote lack of information or knowledge in any general sense. The ignorance that is referred to here is actually the ignorance of our essential nature, that is, self-ignorance. A person may be highly literate or educated, but may still be operating under the spell of self-ignorance. Therefore, the summum bonum of all Indian philosophy is to eradicate this ignorance, root and branch, through self-knowledge, which is the knowledge of our true nature. Advaita Vedanta is the most widely known system of Indian philosophy, both in the East and the West. It presents perhaps the clearest formulation of the human predicament and the means to address it. The be-all and end-all of Advaita, which is non-duality, is the absolute non-difference of the individual, that is self or Atman, and the ultimate reality, that is Brahman. It starts with rather lofty assertion that the absolute Brahman alone is real, and the individual self is none other than the absolute. The ultimate reality is called Brahmanda because it is all-pervasive. The Brahmanda is undifferentiated, pure consciousness, devoid of parts, attributes, form, changes, or limitations. It is self-luminous and non-dual, one only, without a second. It is the source and substratum of all and everything. Advaita postulates that at no time ever is our individual self not one with the Absolute. Due to ignorance, that is, avidya, however, we do not realize our true identity with the Absolute, that is, Brahmanda. When this ignorance is removed through the realization of our true self, which is ever identical with the Absolute, we attain liberation from the bonds of our conditioned existence. To achieve this freedom through selfless action is the real purpose of Karma Yoga. Thus, Karma Yoga serves as a preamble to self-knowledge through self-renunciation. Indian philosophy makes it clear that Karma Yoga purifies the mind and prepares it to receive the wisdom of self-knowledge, which alone leads to spiritual freedom. What is karma? Etymologically speaking, the word karma is derived from a Sanskrit word karman, which means action or deed. As a moral principle, karma means at once the deed and the result of the deed. The doctrine of karma states that whatever action is done by an individual leaves behind it some sort of potency which has the power to ordain for him joy or sorrow in the future, according as it is good or bad. The moment an action is performed, the universal law of karma takes over and processes it according to its proper nature. According to this law, nothing is chaotic or capricious in the moral realm. As we sow, so we reap. Sow a thought and reap an act. Sow an act and reap a habit. Sow a habit and reap a character. Sow a character and reap a destiny. Put simply, what goes around comes around. A man becomes good by good deeds and bad by bad deeds, says the Brihat Aranyak Upanishad 4.4.5. Thus, karma becomes at once the law of cause and effect, and also nature's way to restore lost harmony. Types of karma. Indian philosophy divides all karmas into three types: Sanchit, Agami, and Prarabdha. This is a most useful classification to understand the workings of the law of karma. Sanchit is karma accumulated in the past. Agami is karma to be worked out in the future. And Prarabdha is karma that has begun to fructify in the present lifetime. All actions, as normally undertaken, entail results or outcomes that have a binding effect. That is, they bind the doer with their results, good or bad. Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action, is the enlightened art of performing actions in such a way that actions lose their binding power. This is accomplished through performing actions with the spirit of self-renunciation and by way of submission to the divine will, so that one remains unattached inwardly while being fully engaged in actions outwardly. This is the alchemy of Karma Yoga. It is when one can so restrain oneself as to only perform actions in the spirit of self-renunciation that one ceases to accumulate any new karma for fresh results. One only has to experience the results of one's previous karma that have ripened for giving fruits. If, in the meantime, one attains true knowledge of one's real self, all past accumulated actions are destroyed. In sum, once certain actions have become fit for fruition, these can't be avoided, like an arrow that has already been shot toward the target. However, those actions that have not yet matured are annulled once and for all, if the person attains self-knowledge in the meanwhile, as advocated by Vedantic philosophy. Does karma teach passive resignation? Some critics remark that the doctrine of karma is fatalistic, so that such teachings are not misconstrued as a doctrine of passive resignation and a license for laziness. The sages have always advised seekers to first do their part diligently and then trust in God. The following Sufi story illustrates this point admirably. Doing our rightful share first and then trusting in God. Once, a novice seeker paid a visit to a Sufi master to learn something about the art of living. The master lived in a small tent in a remote part of the desert. The young seeker entered the tent intently and, after paying respects, took his place among the select audience seated quietly around the Sufi. The Sufi greeted the young man with a smile and asked him how he got there. The young man said that he had come riding on a camel. "Where is your camel now?" asked the Sufi. "I left it outside, under Allah's care," replied the young man, trying to impress the master. "Go, first tie the camel, and then place your trust in God," replied the Sufi. This story also demonstrates that the strength of a teacher lies in using mundane occasions of life to illustrate the deeper lessons of life. Moral balance sheet or sure path to sagehood? Hindus find karma very useful in explaining the experiences of life. It is seen as a law of moral harmony. It provides a highly plausible explanation of inequities in life and thus destroys the cause of envy and jealousy and consequent ill will. For example, our neighbor is more fortunate because he or she has earned it. It also seems to remove impatience. For example, whatever is mine shall come to me sooner or later. It must be noted that the doctrine of karma does not negate the idea of personal freedom. Though our present seems to be largely determined by our own past, the future seems to be dependent on the propriety of our present actions. In the words of Sir Radhakrishnan, the cards in the game of life are given to us. We do not select them. They are traced to our past karma. But we can call as we please, lead what suit we will, and as we play, we gain or lose. And there is freedom. In Indian philosophy, the law of karma is used to explain the cause of human bondage, as well as the means to attain liberation from bondage. When actions are performed with a selfish motive, they bind. When actions are performed with a spirit of self-renunciation and by way of submission to divine will, they liberate. Performance of actions selflessly purifies the mind and renders it worthy to receive the liberating spiritual wisdom. Ethics is thus considered a necessary prelude to spiritual freedom. According to a well-known Indian dictum, scriptures do not cleanse the ethically unworthy. According to Karma Yoga, it is not what one does, but the motive or intention behind the act that produces the binding effect of karma. God cares more for adverbs than for verbs. Accordingly, it is not necessary to renounce any activity. All that is needed is to act with pure unselfishness. In the following pages, this path of enlightened action is explored in greater depth as the alchemy of sagehood, the realization of one's highest self. Key teachings regarding Karma Yoga. The Bhagavad Gita starts with Arjuna's admittance of his confusion with regards to what is decidedly good in life. This is the basic human dilemma, the conflict between duty and desire. Arjuna admits that he is confused about the right thing to do, surrenders to the Supreme, and humbly asks for the guidance on the path. The teachings regarding Karma Yoga are presented throughout the Gita, although chapters 2 to 5 specifically deal with it. Chapter 3 is specifically designed as the path of action. Sri Krishna provides an important clue about this path, starting with the 2 succinct verses in chapter 2 as follows. Your right is to work only, but never to its results. Let not the fruit of action be your motive, nor let your attachment be for inaction. Do your duty to the best of your ability, O Arjun, with your mind steadfast in equanimity, abandoning worry and selfish attachment to the results, and remaining equanimous in both success and failure. This equanimity of mind is called yoga. Sri Krishna presents all the foundational elements of Karma Yoga in these 2 verses. The first verse presents an existential fact. We have no control over the results of our actions. This is true whether we are talking about actions in the secular or the sacred sense. Even our control over our actions per se is also very limited, given that all actions are performed by force of our nature. This crucial point is also elaborated later in chapter 3 and 5 of the Gita. So that we do not therefore resign ourselves to inaction, verse 47 clarifies that the teaching here is about renunciation of results and not renunciation of actions themselves. That is renunciation in action and not of action. Verse 48 exhorts us to perform our actions to the best of our capacities, abandoning any concern for their results, remaining equanimous in both success and failure. This evenness of mind in both success and failure is called yoga. However, remaining unconcerned about the results is not a license for sloppiness. One has to perform one's actions remaining steadfast in the yoga of equanimity. This yoga or equanimity is in fact the dexterity or kaushalam in the performance of actions. This dexterity works in two ways. It frees actions from their inherent binding power, while at the same time transforming actions into effective means of spiritual freedom. The yogis perform actions unattached for the purification of their mind, says the Gita. Chapter 3 of the Gita, titled The Path of Action, Karma Yoga, begins with a clarification that there are two paths: the path of knowledge for the contemplative and the path of works for the active. It adds, however, that no one attains perfection merely by giving up actions, without possessing self-knowledge. After all, no one can remain without action even for a moment. Everyone is driven to action by nature. One cannot even maintain one's body without action. Therefore, one attains the supreme by performing actions effectively, without attachment as a matter of duty. Only actions in the spirit of renunciation do not bind. The wise act for the unification of the world at large. Then come two verses that provide perhaps the greatest raison d'être of all actions performed by force of inherent qualities. All actions are performed by gunas or qualities of primordial nature or prakriti. One whose mind is deluded by egoism thinks, I am the doer. But one with true insight into the respective domains of gunas and actions, knowing that gunas as senses merely move among gunas as objects, does not become attached. These verses state that we perform all actions by the energies of three qualities or gunas, that is, purity or sattvic, activity or rajasic, and inertia or tamasic. Acting upon gunas via senses and deluded by our ego sense, the ahankara, we take ourselves to be the doers. But those who understand the respective domains of these gunas and their actions do not get attached to them. The knower of truth or being, centered in the self, should think, I do nothing at all. Though seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, going, sleeping, breathing, speaking, letting go, holding, opening, and closing the eyes, convinced that it is the senses that move among sense objects. The above verses state that the seer of reality is firm in his or her belief that I do nothing at all, realizing that the senses are moving among the sense objects. Sankara explains in his commentary that one who has the knowledge of the actionless self sees in action, for he or she realizes that in all actions the senses operate upon objects, while the self remains immutably inactive. The Bhagavad Gita tells us that for one who knows the self, who rejoices solely in the self, who is satisfied with the self, and who is content in the self alone, for him there is nothing more left to do. In other words, the self is ever actionless, as action in nature is inaction in the self or Atman. Ultimately, the self is beyond both action and inaction. For as we do with action, we also incorrectly attribute inaction to the self, as we see, for example, in the phrase, quiet and doing nothing I sit happy. A question may be asked here. If, for the knower of the self, nothing remains to be done, then how do we explain the apparent actions of the enlightened ones? In his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, Sankara, the greatest Indian philosopher, presents at least 4 explanations. The sages act. Number 1. With a view to set an example to the masses, so the unwary do not go astray. Number 2. For the unification of the world at large, Lok Samgraham. For the welfare of the world at large, Sarva Bhute Hite. Number 4. For the purification of the self, Atma Shuddhe. In verse 5.25 and 12.4, a liberated person is described as most naturally and intently engaged in seeking and promoting the welfare of all beings. Sri Krishna, using himself as an example of a liberated being, tells Arjun, "There is nothing in all the 3 worlds for me to do, nor is there anything worth attaining, unattained by me. Yet I continue to work." Then, in verse 3.25, we find the clearest practical advice to live by. As the unwise act with attachment, so should the wise, seeking maintenance of the world order, act without attachment. In sum, the seers act for the well-being of all beings and for the unification of the world. At the highest level, they spontaneously embody the virtues of universal morality, such as selflessness, compassion, desirelessness, forbearance, peace, and harmony. This is the culmination of Karma Yoga. Conducting our affairs without the tag of doership. The alchemy of Nishkam Karma, or selfless action, lies in neutralizing the binding power of karma. When an action is performed with an egoistic feeling, the pride of doership, then the karma binds us in 2 ways. First, it reinforces our false sense of ego, thus making the egoic grooves deeper. Second, it sows the seeds of reaping the good or bad results of our actions. From the absolute standpoint, it makes little difference whether the so-called results of our actions are good or bad, since both are ultimately binding in the sense that both will require the agent, the ego entity, to be there to experience the results. It will create more occasions for further karma to be generated, which is precisely what conditioned existence or samsara entails, the cyclic rounds of endless births and deaths. This does not, therefore, involve complete spiritual freedom or mukti from all phenomenal existence once and for all, the summum bonum of all Indian spiritual pursuits. Viewed in the light of Indian doctrine of mukti, all our selfish actions suffer from the defect of tainted results, or viprita dosha, that is, they lead to bondage. Only selfless actions purify the soul and prepare it to receive the spiritual wisdom that alone leads to liberation in due course of time. This is then the gist of Karma Yoga. Perform all actions as offerings or arpan to the Supreme and accept all results as graceful gifts or prasada from the Supreme. That is, performing all actions in the spirit of service to the Lord, Ishwar Arpan Bhavna, and accepting all results as gracious gifts from the Lord, Ishwar Prasad Bhavna. The following story clearly illustrates how one can discharge one's duties most diligently without any sense of personal agency. Source of our misery and sorrow. False sense of ownership. Once, a king decided to celebrate his birthday in an unusually generous manner. He announced that on his birthday, he would organize an exhibition in which traders from far and wide would be invited to display their goods for sale. However, on the day of his birthday, anyone could come to the exhibition and get anything they wanted for free. This was the best deal ever, so people rushed from everywhere to get things for free on the day of the king's birthday. Toward the evening, a sage was seen walking through the stalls. He did not seem to be interested in anything that was displayed. Instead, he had been asking for the whereabouts of the king, who organized the unusual exhibition. Some people surmised that he might have a special wish that he wanted to express directly to the king. He was soon directed to the king's court. As the sage walked into the court, the king greeted him respectfully and asked him if he found anything worth getting from the stalls in the exhibition. The sage indicated what he wanted was not available in the exhibition. The king readily agreed that he would be most happy to give him anything he wished for. "Anything?" asked the sage. "Just to make sure." The king replied, "Yes, I would be happy to give anything that you would like to have." The sage said, "Actually, I want your kingdom." At first, the king was very surprised at the sage's unusual request. Then, being true to his word, the king said, "I will be happy to fulfill your wish. You can have my kingdom and everything that goes with it. It is all yours. Kindly come forward and be seated on the throne." Everyone in the court was stunned to hear this, and there was dead silence for several minutes. They had never seen or heard something like this before. Everyone present was even more surprised when they heard the sage address the king. "I am very pleased with your generous sense of renunciation. However, I have no desire to claim this or any other throne. I am a forest dweller and have no attraction for such worldly things. I ask you only this: from now onward, please rule your kingdom as before, but with the understanding that it really belongs to me. You are just a caretaker. This way, you will be able to conduct all its affairs without your usual sense of me and mine. Above all, you will always be happy and content, because all worries and misery come from our false sense of ownership and undue attachment to things that are ultimately transient and subject to change." The sage left the court. The king's perspective on life and leadership had been changed forever. Freedom from the ego. The knower of self has achieved complete freedom from the shackles of egoism, that is, from the false sense of doership. In a most telling verse, the sage Ashtavakra analyzes the malady of egoism and prescribes the fitting medicine. "Do you have been bitten by the great black serpent of egoism? I am the doer. Drink the nectar of the faith. I am not the doer, and be happy. Finally, we present a story that crystallizes the burden of false ego in a powerful manner. This story was first told Swami Brahmatmanandaji Saraswati of Rishikesh. The irony of carrying the dead weight of imposter ego. A man was traveling in a train. He was alone in the train compartment. He was enjoying the moving scenery outside until another passenger got into the compartment and took the seat right in front of him. Outwardly, this passenger looked rather wealthy and was carrying a big long suitcase, a heavy trunk made of iron, that he put right beside himself. Because of its heavy weight, he could not put it up on the berth. The first passenger was watching it rather intently, wondering what could be in the suitcase. He mused that this fellow seemed very wealthy, judging from the clothes and the golden watch, etc., that he was wearing. He must have something really precious in the suitcase, like gold bricks or diamonds. That is why probably he did not even put it up on the berth. Such thoughts were racing through his brain like crazy, as he was watching very carefully every gesture of the mystery passenger. The train stopped at the next railway station, and the mystery passenger asked the first passenger, "I'm going to get a cup of coffee for myself. Do you want me to get you something? Would you kindly watch my luggage until I come back?" "Sure, I will be happy to," said the first passenger. As the mystery passenger got off the train to get a cup of coffee, the first passenger's mind started working in a turbo mode, wildly imagining all sorts of things that could be in the suitcase. In the meanwhile, the train started. Anxiously, he got up to look for the mystery passenger through the window. The mystery passenger was not to be seen anywhere. The first passenger thought that maybe the mystery passenger got on in another train compartment due to the train taking off quickly. So he waited for him till the next train stop. But the mystery passenger did not come back. Now, his greedy mind again started spinning all sorts of thoughts about the contents of the suitcase. And then he suddenly saw the ticket collector, called the guard in India, get in the train compartment to check tickets. He asked this passenger, "Whose suitcase is this, and why is it placed on the seat and not placed on the berth?" A million thoughts raced through this passenger's mind. The ticket collector does not know anything about the mystery passenger. What if I say the suitcase is mine? And then I can have it when he leaves and be rich for the rest of my life. So on and so forth. The ticket collector asked him again, "Whose suitcase is this?" "It is mine, sir." "And why did you put it on the seat?" asked the ticket collector. "Because it is a bit heavy, sir, and I did not have the strength to put it up on the berth. Besides, the compartment was all empty. No one was here besides me, so I thought it is okay to leave it on the seat." "Okay. So what is in it?" asked the ticket collector. The passenger was not ready for this question. Trying to look genuine, he immediately blurted, "Just the clothes, shoes, utensils, the usual household stuff, sir." "Can you please open it for me? I want to see what is in it," asked the ticket collector. "Sure," said the passenger, confused, anxious, and a bit worried, but still trying to maintain a false look of confidence. As the passenger opened the suitcase for the ticket collector to see, he was stunned to find out that there was a dead body inside. The ticket collector asked the passenger, "What is this? And who is this person?" The passenger, who was still in a state of complete shock, tried to explain that he did not know anything about the dead body and that the suitcase did not, in fact, belong to him. But the ticket collector told this person that he had been lying and arrested him on the spot and put him in prison for a crime that he did not really commit. Swami Sri Brahmatmananda Saraswati's comment on this story is noteworthy. This is the common plight of man. All his life, man carries the burden or dead body of the imposter ego, which he falsely calls his own. And because of this false attribution or identification, he remains in bondage or prison, so to speak, and suffers all his life. The story, of course, is symbolic and has subtle layers of meaning. The mystery passenger in the story is a metaphor for Jivan Mukta, a being who is liberated while living, who has abandoned the dead weight of the false ego and has been awakened to the reality of the pure, actionless self. The false identification with body, mind, and senses, and becoming a doer-enjoyer, karta bhogta, as a result, is what is called ignorance or ajnana in Advait Vedanta. The realization that I am not the doer. Since all actions are performed by qualities or gunas born out of nature or prakriti, the divine illusion or maya is called knowledge or jnana. In the Vedantic scheme of things, this is the final end and purpose, the summum bonum of human existence. In a categorical verse of the Ashtavakra Gita, neither doer nor enjoyer, you are verily ever free. Selfless service and servant leadership. The gift of selfless service has a great application in the realm of leadership. First and foremost, leadership is a responsibility, a call to serve, and not a position to wield power or influence. The power that is bestowed upon the leader by the followers is of the nature of trust and good faith. In other words, it is a fiduciary relationship. Viewed in this manner, the only reason a leader exists is to enable and empower the followers. Great leaders approach their work as a contribution, as a service, without any sense of entitlement whatsoever. Practicing servant leadership is deceptively simple. One is led by the deep desire to serve others. It is also about putting others' interest first. History is a testimony to the fact that true leaders, above all, are servant leaders. When all is said and done, there is no human ideal higher than the gift of selfless service. For in serving others, we find our true joy and fulfillment. Concluding remarks. In this chapter, we approached the gift of selfless service as a discipline of Karma Yoga, mainly as presented in the Bhagavad Gita. It is important to realize the true import of these teachings. The most striking feature of our human existence is the sense of doership, the feeling of me, my, and mine. In all that we undertake, these teachings strike at the very root of our fundamental existential illusion, namely the false sense of doership. It invites us to consider a revolutionary viewpoint. Since all actions are performed by the three modes of nature, they do not originate as deliberate acts of volition in our mind. This understanding frees us from the clutches of imposter ego and paves the way for the realization of our true self. For as long as we operate within the false paradigm of me, my, and mine, real self-knowledge will elude us. In elucidating what is called the doctrine of selfless action or nishkama karma, the Bhagavad Gita urges us to renounce selfish actions and fruits of actions. In the ultimate analysis, renunciation is an inner mental act and should not be confused with outward tokens of relinquishment. It is about renunciation of results and not renunciation of actions themselves. That is, renunciation in action and not of actions. True renunciation is the renunciation of kartpan, the deeply ingrained sense of doership. In one word, the alchemy of karma yoga lies in performing actions without the tag of doership. This is the master key. When actions are performed with a spirit of self-renunciation and by the way of submission to the divine will, so that one remains unattached inwardly while being fully engaged in actions outwardly, they serve as harbingers of sagehood, the realization of one's highest self, arousing the mind of compassion. May my life become a suitable vessel of loving kindness and a gateway to great compassion. Mind ever pure, established in serene joy, always refraining from doing harm, forever abiding in doing good. Inspire me thus. For countless eons I have suffered the slings of self-cherishing mind, ever living in the servitude of ego supreme, the vicious cycle of I, myself and me, failing to recognize the great kindness of others, our mother sentient beings. Wake me up from the slumber of ego grasping and guide me in the wisdom supreme, the noble path of the enlightened ones, the path of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. For the sake of others, arouse in me the precious Bodhicitta, the altruistic mind of enlightenment. May all my actions be guided by the sole desire to serve and benefit all beings. Inspire me thus. May I exchange myself with others by developing the mind of equanimity, recognizing that, like myself, everyone desires happiness and shuns sorrow. May I become the cause of their happiness and benefit all beings equally. Inspire me thus.